This is Lenny Farlee, Purdue University Extension Forester. Now let's ID that tree. In this edition of ID That Tree, we're going to identify a relatively uncommon species that just sneaks across the Ohio River into some south central Indiana counties right along the Ohio River border. And that is Carolina buckthorn. Now when you hear the name buckthorn, those of you that are familiar with invasive species might be thinking about some invasives that you've encountered, and that is glossy buckthorn and also European buckthorn. And these can be really significant invasive pests of woodlands and wetlands. But this is a native species, much more common in southeastern United States. It's a small tree to large shrub, and it has some unusual characteristics. And so one of the characteristics is it has a tendency to have both opposite and alternate leaf arrangement on the same plant. And so that is pretty unusual, and actually it can be quite confusing when it comes to using some of the keys for identification. But that is a characteristic of several of the buckthorns. So both alternate and opposite leaf arrangement. It has simple leaves. They're quite elongated and very glossy on top. And the glossiness is actually pretty common for several of the buckthorns, but these are typically longer and larger than some of the other invasive buckthorns. No teeth on the margin of the leaf, and those parallel leaf veins are also good characteristics for several of the buckthorns. The bud on glossy buckthorn is a light tan, somewhat fuzzy, and actually can have kind of a split in some of the bud scales that makes it look a little bit like a buck's hoof, and that's some of the places where it gets its name, but no thorns on this particular species. Does bear fruit that are quite attractive, so red ripening up to a really dark purplish black. Smooth gray bark on the stems. Can get a little rougher as it gets some size and age. This particular one is competing with some sassafras in this planting location. So we're in Tippecanoe County, not in its native range, so this was a planted specimen. So Carolina buckthorn, be sure that you look at some of the identification features for the invasive buckthorn so you can tell some of the differences. But this is a native species that we think is just fine on the landscape, only native to a couple of south central Indiana counties, but nonetheless native to Indiana.